Support comes from KUOW. With over 49 years of remodeling bathrooms, KUOW can help simplify the process, offering tub and shower replacements and full bathroom remodels, local and family-owned, with a showroom in Redmond. Designs and information at tubcove.com.
You rely on this podcast to stay informed and connected with your local community, and we rely on you. Without listener support, this show simply wouldn't exist. Be a part of the team that makes this show possible by donating to our home, KUOW. It only takes a minute. Donate at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thank you.
Just this week, county records show Pacific Place was sold.
Seattle's Ghost Mall finally sold for just a quarter of its pre-pandemic price.
For $66.75 million. Well below the price tag of $271 million when it was last sold.
Pacific Place was once a prized retail centerpiece at the heart of downtown. Now it's just one of many buildings that suddenly feel obsolete. And they're selling at deep discounts.
We're smashing prices. Everything must go now. Take our lowest liquidation prices ever.
These deals are going to be gone quicker than a puff of smoke.
This is Booming. I'm Joshua McNichols.
And I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
Some of these outdated buildings could get demolished to make way for something different. That's because buildings that don't earn money generally don't survive. And in a booming city like Seattle, there's pressure to put every square foot of space to its best use. So how can we build for the future without sacrificing the past? That's coming up. But first, Monica, what have you been working on?
I have been working on growing a baby, as you know.
Yeah,
It's kind of hard to hide at this point.
We've been waiting for you to make the announcement, though, you know?
It's true, yeah. So any day now, I'm going to have my second, which means I'm going to be gone from the show for a few months on maternity leave.
Yeah.
And I already have some FOMO because I know that you guys are going to cover a lot of really good topics while I'm gone, but the show's going to be in great hands. Our producer, Lucy Suchek, is going to step into the hosting seat while I'm gone, and I'll be back in the fall.
Yeah, well, we will miss you so much, but I'm so glad you're getting this opportunity to take some leave for this, and we'll keep the seat warm for you.
Thank you.
Coming up in a minute, downtowns like Seattle are facing dramatic changes. So what buildings should we keep, and which ones should we just throw away? That's after the break.
Support comes from KUOW. With over 49 years of remodeling bathrooms, KUOW can help simplify the process, offering tub and shower replacements and full bathroom remodels, local and family-owned, with a showroom in Redmond. Designs and information at tubcove.com.
This podcast is free, and it's accessible to everyone thanks to support from listeners like you. If you value this show, please consider supporting its production by donating to our home, KUOW. It only takes a minute to give, and you'll be helping to support the production of this podcast. Make a donation at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thanks!
This is my favorite spot.
This is your favorite spot?
Right here.
How come?
Well, okay, like that building, that's been there since 1911.
What is that?
That? That's a parking lot.
Oh.
Yeah. There's a lot of beautiful stuff here too, though.
So Joshua, we live in Seattle. This is the epicenter of new construction. Some call it the crane capital of the U.S. We see old buildings being torn down all the time and sacrificed for new buildings that better serve the communities that they're in. So why are we having this conversation now?
Well, we're in this moment of like really big transition. You know, the pandemic was this tipping point, and now we've got a lot of obsolete buildings because of remote work and stuff. A lot of our buildings just don't fit our needs anymore, and this includes some of the buildings that we love. There's just been this big escalation recently. A lot of buildings are changing hands, and some of these old buildings, they're going to need to adapt or get torn down. One example is the Meridian building downtown. Now, that's the place where GameWorks is. There's also a 16-plex movie theater in that building.
The Regal Meridian 16 movie theater in downtown Seattle will also be closing its doors.
It's for sale now. And the sales brochure advertises the building as a possible teardown. It's several pages in, but it says that, if you wanted to, you could tear this thing down and put 3 high-rise towers there instead. And Monica, this building isn't even that old. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's very sleek and glass and all that.
And it's right by the mall we were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah, it's right near Pacific Place. Whoever buys it will have to choose what to do with it. Can they sort of renovate it and make movie theaters attractive again, or are they going to put something totally new there?
Okay, well, I can't say that I have a big emotional attachment to the GameWorks building. But I do love historic buildings, and it's sad to see them torn down and replaced with these boxy, modern rectangles that we see all over town. Is this something I just have to get over?
I'm never going to tell you that you just have to get over the sense of loss that you might feel for, some building that you valued being gone. This can be really sad for people sometimes. I'm thinking of Busch Garden, which is was this beloved karaoke place in the International District. This is supposedly the birthplace of karaoke in Seattle, and it was beloved by many people. So when that place was sold, the landowner said they were going to tear it down and put up, housing. People really took that hard.
Yeah, I can see that. But at the same time, Seattle has a housing crisis. So, what's the more urgent need? Yeah,
exactly. That's the situation with any one piece of land. There's always this question of what is the best use of this limited land? Is it to provide places for people to live, or is it to sort of, save the original karaoke bar that people love, There is a little bit of good news, though. I mean, Busch Garden, even though it had to lose its old location, it did find a new home in a new housing development.
So it sounds like housing won in this case, but it doesn't always, right? So when does it make sense to choose the beloved neighborhood institution instead?
Yeah, well, sometimes, the person who buys it believes that there's a value in not tearing it down. And sometimes the best value is adapting it instead. I want to give you an example of somebody who does this all the time. His name's Mike McMenamin. And this guy's kind of a legend. I mean, he started with his brother with his one little pub in Portland and grew this into an empire, over 50 buildings. 20 of them are major historic properties that they've sort of preserved and adapted. They've got more than 3,000 employees, so this is a pretty big operation.
Yeah, I love McMenamins. I've been to a bunch of them, and it's just very, very cool to see how they're decorated in this very historic, traditional style that respects the fact that they're these old buildings, but still is making modern use of them.
Yeah, and pretty playful too. I mean, they're always putting gargoyle gestures up here and there and stuff like that. I went to visit one of his most recent projects. It's the Elks Temple in Tacoma. It's just a great example of how complicated it is to adapt an old building to new uses, but also how valuable that can be. Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's this really old building. It used to be an Elks Temple. It looks almost like, a museum or something on the outside. But people don't really join those fraternal clubs anymore. So this building had been vacant for 30 years when he bought it. And inside it was just a mess.
There was paint peeling and, rusty this and rusty that. And the floor was all gone.
Was there vandalism all over this spot too?
Oh, sure. There was graffiti all over the place. It was great. There was a 30-year run of freedom in this building, so there was some incredible painting.
In this mess, he had a vision. It's this grand old building, and he saw good bones and great character.
This is striking a personal chord for me because I'm in the middle of remodeling my 1940s house, and I can say that even when you have a vision, adapting something old is a lot harder in many cases than building something new.
Yes, and it can be very expensive.
Yes.
This building is way more complicated than that. It's kind of like it had this performance space at the center, and then there's all these spaces around that serve it. But into that, they're trying to, kind of cram in all these modern uses that serve the market today. And it was kind of like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Things don't always line up. They end up with stairways everywhere because they're trying to connect the floors where they don't, go all the way across. And then underground, there's sort of all these hidden hallways trying to tie these spaces together. I remember there's one place in the hallway, it's kind of like a little dead end. You get there and there's 4 doors surrounding you on these different walls. One of them doesn't open. They each have like 3 or 4 different doorknobs on them, so you're not even sure where to grab. And they've got labels on these doors. One says this way, one says that way, one says the other way. The second one, you open it up and there's a false wall behind it. I think there's like a skeleton painted on it or something.
It's very Alice in Wonderland. I'm picturing like one to make you tall and one to make you small.
Curiouser and curiouser.
I mean, this building is not normal. That's part of its charm, and people love going through it. It's kind of like a treasure hunt to find all the interesting nooks and crannies, or like the little hidden bars. But the building does really bug some people.
We had a building inspector from the Midwest that was out here on vacation and couldn't figure out what was going on and didn't like it. Complained to the building officials here, and they said, "We approved it. We like it. Go back to the Midwest."
In the Midwest, I'm picturing like buildings that are all very like flat and easy to navigate, and everyone's very polite going through the doors.
I'm sure it depends where you are. But, Tacoma has been struggling for a long time, and they actually have a lot of practice at this thing that downtown Seattle is facing now after the pandemic. You got low real estate values and vacant buildings. And in Tacoma, I feel like out of that struggle has grown this sort of problem-solving spirit. And, their attitude is not like, how does this violate the rules, but sort of like, how can we work with you to make this possible? And now, because of that, the Elks Temple is a hotel, a concert venue. It's got multiple bars and restaurants and event spaces,
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really great. And I've already admitted that I have a soft spot for both McMenamins and old buildings. But is this grand experiment in preserving the past actually working?
It depends on what you mean by working. I mean, it's not making money. It was this marathon project. It cost, $30 million to renovate it, and now it's losing money every month. There are people inside of McMenamins who are telling Mike that, really you should sell this.
I'm sure that they have a good case. I mean, a $30 million project with stairways everywhere and weird architectural things, that sounds hard to work with. What's making this project worth it for him? Why is he so committed to keeping this old building alive?
I mean, Mike tells me that he's drawn to the buildings first, and then he'll just work out the finances later.
I love that. I'm going to tell my husband that about our remodel project.
Well, I mean, it's not just he's not just being irrational. He does have evidence for this because it's worked for him in the past, because he knows there's going to be a long-term payoff. People are just drawn to historic buildings.
I mean, to me, it's a huge magnet. You can feel it when you walk in an old building. The history, especially this place, has just layers and layers and layers of history, and so many people are connected to it in one way or another, that it's that bond, and that's the community sort of bond that is a powerful driver.
I hear this from people all the time, and they tell me, my neighborhood is changing so much. I feel like this place has lost its character, or it's lost its soul. You see this if you go to Vanishing Seattle, the website, and just see them document, beloved building after beloved building that has been lost. There's a mourning that comes when people feel like so much has changed and they've lost their anchor to the past, which is one thing I learned from Mike. He said, history can be kind of an anchor for people in a neighborhood that's changing so much. If one of these buildings can be preserved, it can actually help you feel like you haven't completely lost the neighborhood that you knew.
Yeah, it becomes kind of a life raft, right? Because these choices are really hard. They're emotional for people. It's not just about money. It's about whether people feel like their neighborhood has lost its soul.
Yes. But here's the most fascinating thing I learned while looking into this story. What if we didn't have to choose between tearing something down to build something new and paying huge prices to renovate and retrofit an old building. Like, what if there was a third way?
Love a third way.
There's this movement to create what are called open buildings. And this is an idea I want to spend a little bit of time on. Open buildings are, they're buildings that are sort of like transformers. You can change the walls, you can change the plumbing around. The idea here is that you design buildings from the moment they're built so that they're easy to change in the future. You put the flexibility in there from the very beginning. This idea has been around for a long time. Surprise, surprise, like everything else in this show, it goes back to World War II.
It always goes back to World War II.
That's this period when cities all over the world were in this process of rebuilding, either because they were bombed or because soldiers were coming home and starting families, making the baby boom. Kind of like you are.
I am a soldier.
It was kind of this small but influential movement back then, but it's getting renewed interest today, because our downtowns are littered with obsolete buildings. I spoke to an architect in LA named Farooq Amin, who's advocating for open buildings. He's originally from Bangladesh.
The whole perspective that you don't necessarily design a building for 10 years or 15 years or 25 years, but that it's there forever, and you figure out a way to reuse it is very much a part of the culture that I grew up in. You take whatever's given to you and you continue to use it, because why would you destroy it and start anew?
Amin sits on the Council on Open Buildings, and he thinks it's kind of strange that we need an organization like that to spread this kind of long-term thinking here in the U.S. But he says, we kind of have to have this movement here because of how we treat buildings. Basically, in the U.S., we treat buildings as fast fashion.
So, we've got a specific event that we need a look for, and we order it online for $10, and then we never use it again.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But with open buildings, the idea is that, I'm trying to think of what the outfit equivalency is. Maybe if you chose an outfit that had some simple basic thing that you could use actually for many different purposes if you just styled it differently.
A timeless piece.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the idea behind open buildings. There are some specific things that they do. For example, the building is kind of built in layers, and each layer has different amounts of permanence. There's no internal load-bearing walls. That means, on your house, I imagine there's a wall inside that maybe holds up the roof.
Yes.
With an open building, there's no load-bearing walls inside. You can just knock them down and put them back in new configurations as needed. Inside the floor, you can lift up the floor and reconfigure the plumbing and the power and all that. So it's easier for these buildings to change in ways that they may not have anticipated.
Like what?
Well, for example, in California, there was recently this law change that says that schools have to provide gender-neutral bathrooms. This is not something that the original building designers anticipated, but in the schools where they have used this open buildings concept, it's much easier and cheaper for them to add these bathrooms in the future. There's this quote I love from Stuart Brand, the guy who founded the Whole Earth catalog, general, all-around, interesting, hippie-type guy. But he really helped promote this idea of open buildings through this book that he wrote called How Buildings Learn. There's a bunch of great quotes from him, but one that I love says, "All buildings are predictions.
All buildings are predictions.
And all predictions are wrong."
All predictions are wrong.
I love that.
He also said, buildings are something you start, not something you finish.
It's cool because we think of buildings as such a fixed concept. Are there any examples here in Seattle?
Well, there's one local example of a very prominent building that uses some principles of the open building concept, the Seattle Public Library downtown branch. You know that weird building that looks kind of like it's folded out of weird mesh?
Yeah, it's hard to miss.
Yeah. Well, one thing that makes it an open building is, on the third floor and I think the fifth floor where all the computers are and stuff, it's got all the utilities are in the floor. You can lift up the floor in chunks so that you can sort of reroute things easily. I remembering when Rem Koolhaas, the architect, was first proposing this design to the city of Seattle, he gave this presentation. He had a slideshow, and I think it was Benaroya Hall. And he put up a slide showing an electrical outlet in a library. I believe it was in the old Seattle Public Library branch downtown before they demolished the old one. And there were all these things plugged into it, and they were leading to all these cell phones that were charging. And then there was like a fax machine and like a copy machine. They're all trying to share this outlet. And KUOW comment was like, how could we have predicted that electrical outlets would be in such demand, you know? But of course, like technology changed and those outlets became very important. And one thing he did in the new design is just made it very easy to put in new outlets without having to pay an arm and a leg because you had to redesign the structure just because you want to put in a new outlet.
Yeah, again, it hits home because in my house, the old half that was built in 1940 has like 3 outlets for the whole thing. And in the new half, I think the code requires there to be an outlet like every 3 or 4 feet or something.
Yeah.
So this all makes a lot of intuitive sense. Why haven't we been doing it all along?
Well, the main reason is money. There's this professor I talked to. He's quantifying the costs and benefits of this. And he found that short-term investors are not interested because it costs a little bit more money up front. And short-term investors won't recoup that extra cost. They're looking for a quick turn profit. The guy I talked to is Brandon Ross at Clemson University, and he has a name for this problem, the next idiot problem.
I'm going to build a crappy building, and I'm going to sell it to the next idiot. You know, in Miami, I'm going to build a building right there in the hurricane zone. I'm going to sell it to the next idiot.
He's found that there's a lot more receptivity to this idea from long-term investors. He says they can afford to be less idiotic. You know, like cities, hospitals, universities, these kinds of landholders are in it for the long term. And, you know, they can think about life cycle costs that are not going to be recouped for 30 or 40 years. We may all need to start thinking in that way, in that sort of long-term way, because things are changing so fast that it's getting harder to predict that future. I mean, you thought the pandemic changed how we use buildings. Imagine what AI will do.
Well, how would AI change how we use buildings?
It's kind of hard to imagine, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's exactly my point. We have no idea. You know, we can sit here and try to predict that future, but we'll probably be wrong. And then in 20 years, we'll have a whole new batch of buildings that are once again obsolete. And it would cost us a whole lot of money to turn those into something else. So in the long run, it costs us more money not to think this way.
Okay, so we talked about why we love old buildings. We have this emotional connection to them, like Mike McMenamin. But we also have these really urgent needs to make our buildings work for us now. And it sounds like the open buildings concept could be a solution that allows us to have a little bit of both, meeting our emotional needs as well as our practical ones. But part of the reason that we get so attached to historic buildings is because they reflect a moment in history, a moment in time, right? They were built for that particular use. So how do we create these adaptable transformer buildings, but still preserve that connection that we feel to the built environment?
There are definitely things that, you know, we can't do with a modern building, even an open building. You know, we can't have the same kind of ornamentation that we had in some of the old historic buildings because, you know, labor costs are a lot higher, or the terracotta factories that made the beautiful tiles are out of business or something. But in addition to like are loving the old ornamentation and stuff like that, there are other ways that we connect to buildings and have that emotional connection. Oftentimes it's like the stories of how those buildings have served us in the past, how people have lived in that building in the past. Like think of the Showbox in downtown Seattle. Like, is it really the architecture that people are connecting to with that sort of beloved music venue? Or is it that so many great shows were performed there, you know?
Yeah, it's the memories.
It's the memories. And similarly with open buildings, they're sort of like a canvas upon which to paint these memories in the future. And they're not driven by a sort of singular vision by an architect at the beginning to design this sort of piece of sculpture that will be perfect forever, you know, like Rainier Square Tower, which is a swooping mirrored building. in downtown Seattle. It's more like you provide this structure, and then the people inside it will incrementally change it over time. It's less like a sculpture and more like a quilt, where the individual squares will slowly change. People may add new openings, they may add a deck here and there, and that texture becomes a sort of story of how we have connected to that place in different ways in different times, how many lives have touched that building. It's a different way to think about aesthetics, but I think it's more like how we enjoy walking through an old neighborhood where the houses were built in different times. They're not all the same.
Yeah, it's like the building kind of becomes a living thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about. I'm hoping you also have one more end game for me to play.
I don't know. Do we, Lucy?
We do have a game. That's coming up. Okay, I've got a game for you guys. This is a competition, so take it seriously.
Okay.
So serious.
So humans have been adapting and reusing things forever. Early humans made cave door holes to let smoke from the fire. They divided caves into sleeping zones and cooking zones. Like, it's a human thing to make something your own, make your space work for you.
Yeah.
Actually, we probably do it less now because we live in a capitalist consumerist society. But
we just throw our buildings away. It's like them throwing their caves away.
Yeah. So this game has to do with adapting old buildings to work for something new. So I'm going to give you an example of an old building, and I'm going to tell you about the original purpose of the building. And then I'm going to give you 3 choices for what the building has been adapted into. You win if you get most of them right.
Okay.
Okay. The first one should be easy. You all should know this, and I'll be upset if you don't. This building is like very close to where we are right now, close to the KUOW studio.
Oh.
It's on a busy corner at 45th and University Ave in the U District.
Okay.
It's the University National Bank building. It was built in 1912. It has like huge white stone columns. It's large. It has a regal presence, and it's currently being rebuilt into something right as we speak. So here are your 3 options. A Din Tai Fung restaurant.
That would be awesome.
A rock climbing gym. Or a clown school.
Well, I know this is the rock climbing gym because I heard somebody, I heard some gossip about it in the station a while ago.
Okay, so that's your guess, Monica.
Well, what am I supposed to guess now? I also think it's the rock climbing gym, but I wish it was the Din Tai Fung.
You're both correct. It is the rock climbing gym. It's another Seattle bouldering project.
Well, that is pretty interesting because it's like this double height kind of bank space. They in these old banks, they have a lot of vertical space. So
yeah.
It's kind of a cool use.
Okay. Number 2, the Tower Theater in LA. This building was designed in 1927 as the first theater to play talking movies. Oh. So guess what it is now?
I'm from LA and I feel like I should get this,
Yeah,
but I don't immediately know.
Is it an Apple store? Is it still a movie theater but renovated and owned by Netflix for fancy screenings? Or is it a concert hall?
Huh.
The Netflix answer is so specific. I feel like it must be that one.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to guess, I don't know, we've got a bunch of old film theaters in Seattle that are, very lovely and ornamented and are now concert halls, So I'm going to say a concert hall.
You're both wrong.
Oh,
it's an Apple store.
An Apple store.
Yeah, you can go buy iPhones there.
Funny.
Or
Disappointing.
Apple products.
Hey, how egocentric of Apple to I don't know. It feels like presenting the world with our latest products.
It's very Apple to do a project like this, and they've certainly got the cash to take on an old building that needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it does seem like a lot of these adapting of old buildings has been for corporate stores or headquarters, and I think it's because they have the money to do it. And there's also this kind of cool factor, like take an old building and, I don't know, make it into something more modern.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. This is a 93,000 square foot building that was the pork processing factory of Pure Foods in Chicago. It's 3 stories. It takes up a whole city block. Is it A, a food growing hub that includes a hydroponic farm, a beer tap room, a bespoke ice company, an algae lab, bean to bar chocolate truffles, very fancy?
Wow.
Is it B, offices for This American Life? Or is it C, a new model for intergenerational living with small and medium and large loft apartments? Joshua, I know you would like that one.
Okay, who wants to guess first?
It's got to be A, right? What is bespoke ice? Who could invent such a thing?
Yeah, I am kind of stuck on that, like bespoke ice. What? Maybe it means like ice with like liquor in the middle or something?
I'm picturing ice that's like in really specific shapes, like little, like little ducks or little like, I don't know, whatever the occasion calls for bespokenness.
Okay, so that's your guess?
Yeah, I think it's A.
Okay, so this was, you said, what kind of, was it a meat processing place? Is that what you said?
It was a pork processing factory.
Okay, so probably it had really tall ceilings because they had to like have these hooks.
Yeah, it's 3 stories.
The interior, okay, but from floor to floor inside, is it also tall ceilings?
I can't answer that, but it's a 93,000 square foot building.
Yeah.
So
okay, I'm just guessing that it had really tall ceilings, and so that means it would work really well for lofts because you can divide it up into 1.5 floors without like them being super short ceilings that you have to crouch under.
Yeah. So what's your guess? A?
No, my guess is C, the lofts.
Oh, okay. Your guess is C. The answer is A.
Oh!
Bespoke ice wins.
Yes, it's called The Plant. It's a food business incubator whose mission is to develop zero waste food production in an urban location.
Cool.
That is cool.
And the Bespoke Ice Company they sell small and large ice cubes or spheres, kind of like those different shaped ice pieces that you'd get in like a fancy cocktail place. And they sell engraved ice. And they say they're introducing nationwide shipping very soon.
I love it. I'm into it. I would order a lot of weird ice.
Okay, let's tally the points. That's 3 questions. How did you do?
I wasn't even keeping track.
Monica won. I was keeping track. Monica won.
Good job.
Thank you. You're sending me off with a win. I appreciate it. That's it for Booming. Do you have a question for Joshua or me about the economy? Email us at booming@kuow.org.
That's right. And thank you for all the listeners who financially support KUOW. You know, you make this show possible. So if you want to help out, go to kuow.org/donate/booming.
Our producers are Lucy Suchek, who will be stepping into the hosting seat.
Yay, I'm excited.
And Whitney Henry Lester. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
I'm Joshua McNichols. Bye, Monica. Happy maternity leave.
Thank you. We'll catch you next time.